workshop of the Oshkosh Common Council, Plan Commission, and Traffic Review Advisory Board. Tom, would you instruct everyone about the phone procedure?
Please silence your cell phones
Thank you,
so our TV audience is not distracted. And
thank you. I'd like to start with introductions. James, why don't you kick it off?
All right, James Robbie, Director of Public Works.
Mark Roloff, City Manager.
Jim Collins, Transportation Director.
Dan Szynski, Traffic Review Advisory Board.
Steve Haas, Traffic Review Advisory Board.
Michael Ford, Plan Commission.
John Kiefer, Plan Commission.
Jake Krause, City Council.
Caroline Pansky, City Council.
Steve Cummings, Mayor.
Alan Davis, Community Development Director.
John Hens, Plan Commission.
Tom Forty, Plan Commission.
Bob Viger, Plan Commission.
Tom Perry, Plan Commission.
Kathy Prop, Plan Commission.
Ross Hohenschneider, Advisory Board.
Steve Godey, Assistant Director of Public Works.
And Kelly Groyle, KL Engineering.
Okay, thank you for everyone. With that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Davis.
Thank you. I'd like to give everybody a little background. If you recall, we went through several iterations of a plan for Oshkosh Avenue and extending Westfield and Keller north to serve the Oshkosh Corporation Global Headquarters. We knew when we proposed that to them that would have potentially significant impacts on Oshkosh Avenue. So after the dust was settled and Oshkosh Corporation had picked the city of Oshkosh on this particular site, I think one of the first calls or emails was to the traffic impact analysis engineering firms. We went through a process to identify who we thought would be the best fit for this particular project. It turned out to be, I believe your name is KL Engineering out of Madison. Went through an RFP process. They proposed a scope of services, and we felt they best matched those needs for studying Oshkosh Avenue. And in general terms, not to take too much away from Kelly there, but it basically was Oshkosh Avenue from 41 over to the Fox River. So that included the major intersections at 41, Keller, Westfield, and Sawyer. So I think those are the areas that staff was most concerned about, as well as the corridor itself. So that's what we kind of put into the RFP. We needed those all examined based on what was going to be proposed, what's going to be developed. And that all needs to be tied up in a nice bow so that we can do traffic projections and we can adequately plan the infrastructure to serve Oshkosh Avenue. So this is the first step in a long process to design and build the proper infrastructure to serve this corridor and all the surrounding land uses. So that gives you a little context as to why we're here today. Do you have any questions on that? Okay. And I'm going to turn it over to Kelly, a traffic engineer, who will kind of walk us through the handout tonight. And do you want to handle questions as we go through, or save them till the end?
Yeah, I think this is a workshop, kind of informal format. So I think if you've got a question on anything as you see it come up, feel free to kind of just give a shout out, and we'll try to address them as we go. And then when we get to the end, if we need to kind of flip back and forth through the slides to try to answer any more questions, we can certainly do that. But I think feel free to ask questions as we go when it's fresh on your mind, and it maybe somebody else may be thinking the same thing. So let's just take them as we go.
Sounds good. Okay. Well, we're here, like Alan mentioned, for the Oshkosh Avenue area traffic impact analysis. Just to give you a little bit more of a background, if you're not familiar with traffic impact analysis and what it all includes, is basically a way to document and look at redevelopment or new development in an area to see how it impacts the roadway network and the surrounding intersections. So what we do is we look at the area that will have the new development or redevelopment. We collect data at intersections and for the corridor. In this case, we collected intersection movements, or intersection volumes from Washburn all the way to Sawyer Street for the roundabout and signalized intersections. From there, we set up models and model traffic, look at existing and proposed, and kind of see how the development will impact the roadway system. And then we come up with alternatives to help improve the roadway. And that's why we're here today, is to go through some of those alternatives that we looked at and get input from you guys. Our focus for this meeting will be from the Keller Street roundabout to the Fox River. We did look west, like I mentioned, but the connecting highway limits are just west of Keller Street. So we're going to focus on those corridor alternatives and those intersections. But if you guys do have questions regarding the other roundabouts, we can address those. So as I mentioned, the purpose is to review these corridor and intersection alternatives that are in your handout and also on the presentation slides, and have an opportunity to get your input and thoughts about them. So to start, just to give a little bit of a background, and I think many of you are familiar, the Lakeshore Municipal Golf Course is being redeveloped for Oshkosh Corporation Global Headquarters in part of the golf course area. And then there will be some commercial development that's planned for the north side of Oshkosh Avenue. As part of this, to feed into those development areas, there'll be an extension of Keller Street and also an addition of a north leg at the Westfield intersection. Other than that, it's not anticipated that there would be any other driveway accesses along Oshkosh Avenue to serve these new facilities. To give you a background of what we've done to date, we have worked with East Central Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission to come up with background growth traffic volumes. So this would be traffic growth in the area that's not a result of the new development in the northeast quadrant of the interchange. So other development in Oshkosh or just the growth of the municipality through time. So we gathered their data. They have models that help predict what is expected for the future. KL Engineering then looked at the development itself with Oshkosh Corporation headquarters and the new commercial development, and used industry standards to predict traffic volumes that may be generated as a result of this development, and then assign trips to the intersections in the network as people exit and enter these new areas, and how that will impact the roadway system. And then from there, once volumes are determined, we do a traffic analysis. We look at AM and PM peak hours, which are generally the highest for the day. We analyze the existing with current roadway conditions and current volumes. And then we looked at development completion, which should be between 2020 and 2025. With some of those corridor improvements, and then the horizon year, which in this case was 2045. So we modeled with and without development traffic to see what kind of impacts it would have to the roadway system. And as we mentioned, the intersections that were evaluated was from Washburn to Sawyer Street intersection, the signalized and roundabout areas.
Hey, Kelly.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have specific times, the peak times that you
Yes,
analyzed?
So what we did was we had video cameras out there and ran them all day, and what we found to be the AM peak was from 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock in the morning. And that's a general, I mean, each intersection might be slightly different, but for the corridor itself, it seemed to be 7 to 8 o'clock and 4:15 to 5:15 at night.
Thank you.
So that's the background. Is there any other questions before we dive into the corridor alternatives? Okay. So just before we start here, in your packet handout or on the slides, if you are following along, we provided basically a one-page sheet for each of the alternatives. So if you are interested in following along, this would be page 1 of the corridor alternatives. What I tried to do here was provide an easy way that you could look at the typical section, some example pictures. I tried to get something close to what that corridor might look like, and then look at performance measures. you don't want to just look at operations, but consider safety and access and just the feasibility of these alternatives. So I'll try to hit on a little bit of that, and like I said, feel free to stop and ask questions along the way. So to just start from a base point, we have the existing corridor. We have a 66-foot existing right-of-way with 12-foot inside lanes and wider 14-foot outside lanes. There's currently no gutter along there, just a curb and then sidewalk that directly is adjacent to the roadway. Here's some pictures, just looking at, I know they might be hard to see, but basically you have your 66 foot, and like I mentioned, you have your sidewalk right up to the roadway, which provides some limited space for snow removal and comfort to pedestrians. So looking at some of the performance measures, as far as operation goes, with 2 lanes in each direction, it appears to have sufficient capacity for through vehicles now and in the future. But it does have some disadvantages. There are no separate left turn lanes along the corridor that can cause delays to vehicles. And also, this can result in some poor lane utilization. Sometimes what we see with these types of corridors is people hang out in the outside lane to avoid having to shift over if there's a left turner in that inside lane. And also with the interchange to the west, there is a desire to be more on that outside lane. So we're not seeing the utilization of that inside lane as much as we might like to see. As far as safety goes, a 4-lane undivided section tends to be the least safe out of your traditional corridor alternatives. The main thing is because of a higher crash potential. You tend to have more conflict points, so more, possibility for an occurrence of a crash. In addition to that, the speed differential can be an issue as people slow down to turn left or to right into different driveways or intersections. That can create rear-end collisions and things like that. Looking more from a pedestrian standpoint, there is no terrace or strip of grass or pavement separation between the roadway and the sidewalk. So this kind of can create a discomfort to pedestrians. It also does not prohibit or allow for signs to be placed generally in that terrace area, so they're in the sidewalk, which can create some difficulties for people using the facility. Looking at access, it does provide access to all driveways and intersections, but no sort of refuge to make a one-stage crossing maybe eastbound and then westbound and so on. Overall, the feasibility of this alternative is it's low cost or no cost. It's out there today, and it fits in the existing right-of-way. Disadvantages would be the sidewalk not meeting ADA standards, provides minimal space for snow removal in the corridor, and then doesn't provide an opportunity for streetscape or aesthetic pleasing, additions to the corridor. So what we did was evaluate some improvements that we could do, starting with keeping that 4-lane undivided, but just enhancing some of the current typical section. So basically what we would do is narrow down the outside lane to 11-foot lane and provide a curb and gutter that would be there. And depending on right-of-way and how much would be desired, you could put a 3-foot to 6-foot terrace in there and then provide your sidewalk to provide that gap to pedestrians. We'd also recommend you install a left turn lane at the Westfield intersection to separate that traffic from the through movements, especially with the redevelopment to the north. And to the south, you have the high school and things like that, that a left turn lane might be beneficial. Here's a picture of Algoma and Murdoch in Oshkosh. Many of you might be familiar with this intersection. kind of gives you an example of what it might look like, especially at an intersection where you have a left turn lane provided. You would need a little bit more right-of-way there and a terrace between separating the pedestrians and the roadway. Overall, as far as performance measures, it's very similar to the existing, like I talked about. The benefits or differences between this and the existing alternative would be the addition of left turn lanes at Westfield, and the buffer, the terrace between the pedestrians and the roadway. It still would provide full access to all driveways and intersections along the corridor. As far as feasibility, it would be moderate cost. You would have minimal impacts to the right-of-way unless you did want a bigger terrace, and it's sufficient for pedestrian accommodations. The only disadvantages with this would be the extra right-of-way near Westfield intersection for those left turn lanes, and the minimal opportunity for streetscape still. The second alternative we looked at was the two-way left turn lane, or also known as a TWLTL. From Keller to Eagle Street, with the traffic volumes that are out there today and anticipated for the future, you would still need 2 lanes in each direction. And so a 5-lane TWLTL would be the typical section you would have to see out there. And what this alternative provides, if you aren't familiar, it provides 2 lanes of traffic in each direction and then a center lane that basically is allowed for people to turn left. So if you're driving down and you want to turn left at a driveway, you're able to shift over into that lane and make that maneuver. And it can be utilized for both eastbound and westbound traffic. With this, we'd still recommend a terrace and then your sidewalk. From Eagle Street to the Fox River, the right-of-way is a little bit more constrained in that area and might not provide an opportunity to obtain right-of-way that's more than what's out there today. In this area, we would look at a 3-lane TWLTL with 1 lane in each direction. The volumes the daily trips along this section of the roadway are a little bit less in this area, that this might be a feasible alternative to reduce your through traffic in each direction to 1 lane, and then with the TWLTL or the turn lane in the middle. By doing this, it provides a lot of extra space for a terrace and some of those more aesthetic options.
Really, question about that. With the 3-lane version there from Keller to Eagle, from Eagle to the river, is the volume sufficient enough that 3 lanes will be able to handle it?
It's right on the edge, but I think it could make it work. Some of the disadvantages, and I'm going to get into that a little bit, would be the Sawyer Street intersection. It would cause a little bit of additional delays at that section, and also with the lift bridge that you have to consider, it wouldn't relieve that traffic as fast as a 4-lane section.
Are there more accidents when you're going from the 5 down to the 3 when they're merging in? Is there?
Good question, and that's something that's on the next slide too. Is that transition can be a little bit difficult. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a safety issue, but it just can cause confusion or add a little bit of complexity to it. Here's some examples of 2-way left turn lanes. One in Pioneer, west of South Main Street in Fond du Lac, if you are familiar with that area. And then here's one from Madison, Wisconsin. You can see the 3-lane section really narrows down that roadway and provides more opportunity for aesthetics with the pedestrian facility and the terrace. So looking at operations for this compared to the existing and the kind of 4-lane undivided, the big advantage to this is it provides a left turn lane for all accesses. So basically, your through vehicles are never stopped or slowed by left turn vehicles waiting to make their maneuver. This in turn provides better lane utilization. The only disadvantage to this, and kind of alludes to the question that was asked, is the reduced capacity in the 3-lane section. If the volumes increase more than what we are expecting, that could create some additional delays, and then it does create more poor operations at the North Sawyer Street intersection than what we typically would like. As far as safety, this alternative is safer than the 4-lane undivided section. The main reason is because it reduces some of those conflict points by separating those left turns out. And in addition to that, it reduces your speed differential because now as vehicles slow to make that maneuver, they're in a separate lane. Advantages to this alternative is that it still provides full access along the corridor, and it can, studies have shown that it has made it easier for side street traffic, your unsignalized intersections, so at Fox Street or Eagle Street, for those side street traffic to enter Oshkosh Avenue. It might not decrease their delay that they're seeing, but you can cross kind of one direction of traffic at a time. As far as feasibility, again, you provide sufficient pedestrian accommodations. You have minimal right-of-way impacts in that 3-lane section. The disadvantage would be the transition between the roadway sections. If you do decrease to 1 lane in each direction from Eagle to the Fox River, you have to expand back to the 4-lane section on either side. So there's that kind of reduction and then expansion back. And with the 5-lane section, obviously, you're going to have a little bit of a higher cost as right-of-way increases. The last alternative we looked at was the 4-lane divided section. Knowing, again, of the right-of-way constraints from Eagle to the Fox River, this would only be feasible from Keller to Eagle Street. What we would do here is provide a 12 to 14 foot median in the center of the roadway. This can really provide a nice gateway to a community and ability to plant some trees and separate traffic and make it a more aesthetically pleasing roadway corridor. Then at intersections such as Westfield intersection, what you would do is you'd take that median space and utilize it for a left turn. You then would have a small section, and depending on how much right-of-way you'd want to provide in this area, you could do a short 2-foot curb, or you could provide a nice still 6-foot median and have the ability to put a traffic signal or things in there too. So here's some examples. As I mentioned, the one on the top, you can see that this is in Monona, Wisconsin. They have some nice trees growing along the corridor. And then at the intersections, you can have just a narrow curb strip, or again, you can provide more of an actual median too, with a little bit more right of way at those areas. As far as performance measures here, this is optimal capacity for through vehicles. It limits your access points, which I guess can be looked at as a positive or a negative, and it basically focuses on making sure people can get through the corridor. There would be left turn lanes at your major access points, which would also increase operations. The disadvantage would be specifically for the south side of Oshkosh Avenue. To enter those properties, you might have to increase your travel time. You make a U-turn at such as the Keller Street roundabout to access those properties if you are going the opposite direction. As far as safety goes, this is the safest alternative. It's the least likely to have your head-on or your angle crashes, even your rear ends, and especially the angles and head-ons, they're generally the most severe type of crashes that you would see. And then lastly, as far as access goes, it does provide access control through the corridor, but with that, increased safety and so on, you do cause some inconvenience for some of the driveway accesses. As far as feasibility, this really, like I said, provides an opportunity for aesthetic improvements and provides kind of a gateway feature if Oshkosh is interested in that. Provides great pedestrian accommodations and is an easy transition between a 4-lane divided back down to an undivided section. The disadvantages would be the higher cost and the right-of-way that would be required for it. So that was all the corridor alternatives that were looked at. Was there any questions before we dive into some of the intersection stuff? Yep.
Right away, is there opportunity for obtaining more right-of-way, short of buying homes or something like that, radical?
In conjunction with the redevelopment on the north side, there may be some opportunities that, would need to be more further explored more fully as we move through potential implementation here. So like from Keller to about Eagle with all the redevelopment taking place on the north side.
You could carve right-of-way out of the north side. The developers don't want to hear, but
Well, but there may be some opportunity to potentially trade some land that way as well. If we need a little bit, if we got a little bit on the backside, there may be some opportunities there that just need a little more exploration to determine their feasibility. But yeah, initially it looks like, we could probably go to the north side with the right-of-way.
but right now the street is basically paved to the max of the right-of-way.
It's paved right-of-way to right-of-way, from the back of sidewalk to back of sidewalk, it's pavement,
That's the complete right-of-way.
yeah.
Just curious as to why there are no recommendations for bike lanes in any of the feasibility study. I don't know if that was Public Works end or if that was something you weren't asked to do. I just think it could have been included. It would have been nice to see an option in there.
Jim, is that a part of is that in the circulation plan?
Well, I think the thought was that the bicycle accommodations will be provided along the river trail. So what the thought was is that the Wyowash Trail will be connected through potentially, the lakeshore property to connect up to Rainbow Park. So that was the thought process for how bikes would be accommodated.
It wouldn't necessarily be along 21, but we're going to be looking at north-south connections when we get to the intersections. We'll talk about that.
Yeah, because Sawyer goes the whole length, so,
Yeah,
it
and
seems like a good connection in that area, but.
And it goes to Kathy's question, because she already recognized that right-of-way is already going to be a challenge with the options we're kicking around. We could add 2 6-foot lanes, but then we're adding another 12 feet of right-of-way. And the south side is darn near impossible for us to acquire right-of-way.
That's what I was.
Yeah, I mean, as we were looking at it, we're like, then when you have to take a look at the fact that we have 66 feet of right-of-way there, and we're looking at options that are as much as 87 feet of right-of-way. That's 21 feet, and if we can't take it from the south side, it is a challenge. There's no question that we've got a major challenge. So we didn't want to add insult to injury because of the acquisition of
Well,
right
I
of way.
mean, just as, as we're looking through some of these options, I think it would have been nice to at least have it somewhere in there, just one of the options, just so we could see how that would work. But I understand the right-of-way acquisition aspect to that, so.
Ellie is gonna talk about the bike lanes on Sawyer when we get to that intersection, so.
Thank you.
One question, was there consideration given to the fact that Davis Child Care is a very large complex with a lot of children being dropped off and picked up day late, plus Evergreen Manor has added to the new apartment complex. There are plans for continued growth of Evergreen Manor. And I can say this because I'm kind of evergreen manor age. Getting on and off Oshkosh Avenue right now is not that easy for some of those people. So, we looked at the growth of those two complexes and the consideration of both children and senior citizens.
As far as growth from a volume perspective, that was part of the background growth. But as far as those people either traveling to and from those facilities, either in vehicles or walking with the daycare, maybe the little kids would go on a walk during the day. I think that's where you want to improve those pedestrian facilities for them. And as we get into the intersection alternatives with that daycare right on Westfield and things, making sure that they provide adequate access, crossing the street and crossing Oshkosh Avenue in an appropriate and safe manner. Does that help?
Yep, thank you.
So as we go through all the options, each option gets more expensive as we go through the,
For the most part, yeah. As we go, the 4-lane undivided would probably be your most expensive option.
and beautification wise, obviously the ones with the trees in the middle. I mean, that's coming into a community, that's the most welcoming.
Correct.
But
Yep.
how much more expensive would that one be compared to the 5-lane,
Compared to the
percentage wise?
Yeah, compared to the 5-lane, I actually think they'd be fairly comparable, depending on a lot of the cost is right-of-way impacts. If you were to provide a median versus a two-way left turn lane, you're extending for the most part the same amount of right-of-way and meaning the same amount of pavement and so on. So I would think that they'd be pretty close in cost.
And from a construction standpoint, putting the additional pavement for the left turn lane in certainly is a cost, but also, having put the extra curbing around the center island and, it's a little bit trickier. So, probably from a construction cost standpoint, the median will be a little bit less, but it does, add some trickiness to the construction that kind of shrinks that differential. But I would think the median option would have a little bit less cost than a fully paved all the way across option.
Thank you.
Probably a question for Mr. Roloff, but it is I would assume these are special assessments to the property owners that are affected as well. Is this any different from anything else we've done in the past, since this is more of a unique situation regarding?
It's funny that you mentioned
Circumstances.
that issue came up with the Joint Review Board this morning. We have not factored that in yet. That'll ultimately be a council decision. And the dilemma we're going to have down the road is that on the north side of this development, it's commercial, and it's largely the reason for that. That would normally say do special assessments. On the south side, it's residential, and it's primarily being done for commercial purposes. That would lean you towards not doing special assessments. So we haven't ruled it out, and we certainly have to consider that, and that'll be something we'll bring to council, and that'll be another set of options that you'll have to wrestle with as we go through that. So I'm punting a little bit, but eventually it's going to end up in council's lap.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We'll be hearing about that one, I
Yeah.
guarantee it.
There are substantial dollars in the TIF though that was set aside in that TIF for the corridor for roadway improvements.
That is correct. And we had to take the most conservative approach. We had to take the most conservative approach because we don't know what council will ultimately do, and we had to have the project funded. But eventually, that's a legitimate policy issue for the council to take up.
Steve or James, is the infrastructure in there, the sewer, storm sewer, sanitary sewer, water, is that ready to be replaced? Is it good to go, or?
Within Oshkosh Avenue itself?
Yeah, yes.
It's a little bit of a mixed bag in Oshkosh Avenue, as we have actually this past year extended some of the newer sewer to the east from Westfield to be prepared for the Mary Jewel lift station. To the west, a lot of that was repaired as part of we did it when the Highway 21 was closed for the overpass and the Highway 41 project. So west of Westfield is in relatively good condition and been replaced. I think the oldest utility in that area is probably some 60s water main that's left in that area. To the east, once we get east of about Eagle Street, the sanitary sewers are quite old along with the water mains in that area. So those would be near the end of their life if we were doing a full reconstruct at this point in time.
Sure. Questions?
Keep going.
Okay, excellent. Moving on to looking at some of the intersection alternatives. Starting with the Oshkosh Avenue and Sawyer Street intersection. Quickly go over what's there today. This is a pretty interesting intersection. There's a lot going on. And I don't know the best way to describe it, but it's pretty much every direction has two types of traffic control it needs to go through, which ends up being about 3 different signal areas that I kind of try to depict here. But basically, if you're going eastbound on Oshkosh Avenue, you're going through 2 signalized intersections. If you're going eastbound and turning right onto Sawyer, you have a traffic signal and a yield sign that you have to maneuver. And for drivers that drive this every day, maybe it's not so confusing, but the first time I took a look at this, it can be a little bit of a head scratcher. So in looking at that, we wanted to try to think of ways that we could simplify this up a little bit. Just to briefly, while we have an aerial up here, we do have some constraints in this area that we had to consider while coming up with alternatives. You have the Sawyer Creek, I believe, with a bridge here that we wanted to try to avoid impacting. And then also there is a monument here, a smokestack leading into the park. And we wanted to make sure we kept intact.
Good idea. Be honest, you asked Kelly and we said, don't touch it.
Yep. So those were the constraints to the south. And to the east, we have the lift bridge over the Fox River. So those were 3 things we were considering while coming up with options. In addition to that, you have Sawyer Street with Oshkosh, and then you also have Rainbow Drive to the north, which is just offset of that intersection. So trying to look at that and maybe make that a little bit of a one intersection or a better intersection. So following the same format as the corridors, looking at performance measures here. As far as operations go right now, it does have acceptable level of service for all movements and would in the future if this intersection was to remain as is. It does do a good job or an efficient job of relieving the backups of traffic with the lift bridge. Obviously, when you shut down one approach of your roadway for several minutes, you're going to have some backups and issues, but typically we'll see with signalized intersections, Signal does a good job of mitigating those issues and bringing it back to regular capacity in a pretty quick manner. The disadvantage to the current intersection is it does not really meet current standards today with mainly the multiple control and also a signal with like a yield control for one movement is not recommended practice. As far as safety goes, the intersection's confusing. It's difficult for pedestrians to cross, especially when you have the 2 parks on the north and south side, and you do have an increased number of conflict points, both for vehicles and pedestrians as you're crossing this. Access, the nice thing about a signalized intersection here is there are times when Oshkosh Avenue is stopped. So that allows for the 2-way stop-controlled intersections that are to the west, such as Eagle Street and things, that side road traffic to be able to turn onto or off of Oshkosh Avenue. The disadvantages would be the conductivity between the north and south side of Oshkosh Avenue. If you are on Sawyer Street, you have no ability to get to Rainbow Drive with the current intersection. You would have to most likely turn left to go to Fox Street and go through the neighborhood in order to get to Rainbow Park or the boat landing or other properties in that area. Same with eastbound Oshkosh Avenue. There's no way to get to Rainbow Drive directly from this intersection as it stands today. So some of the advantages to this alternative is, again, no or low cost because it's there today. Fits in existing right-of-way, and it is compatible, or fairly compatible with the lift bridge operations. The disadvantages would be the complexity of the intersection with multiple signals and traffic control devices, and it not meeting, current intersection control and pedestrian standards. So the first alternative we looked at was maintaining the overall geometrics of the intersection the same, but providing one signalized intersection. So bringing all those signals and traffic control into one location. In this case, some of the advantages to this would be that it would provide fewer conflict points, provide a more conventional crossing for pedestrians, and improve driver expectancy as a result of that. I would like to note too, going back to the conceptual drawing, based on our traffic volumes that are out there today and in the future, we believe that we could get away with a single left turn lane. Right now there's 2 left turn lanes, westbound left turn lanes. This could provide then an opportunity to, I know it's not shown here, but reduce Sawyer Street to 1 lane going southbound, because I think about 750 feet from this intersection it's already a single lane, and therefore provides some sort of bike facility along Sawyer Street, since you would not need that second lane for vehicle traffic. So that could be an advantage for bike traffic. Some of the advantages to this is it would be lower cost with minimal right-of-way impacts. It simplifies the intersection, and like I said, it's compatible with the lift bridge still. The disadvantage is it doesn't solve the problem of the conductivity between the north and south side of Oshkosh Avenue. So the second alternative, we have several different alternatives in alternative 2. Basically, the difference between the 3 of them is based on what sort of property acquisition would be required to make this work. So we just wanted to show several options. There might be some other options out there depending on what right-of-way acquisition the city would be able to obtain if they were to obtain some of these properties. So going through them one by one, 2A, basically all these look at extending Sawyer Street to the north. This one would extend Sawyer straight up to Graham Avenue and connect in. What this would do is the existing Rainbow Drive south of Graham would go away. You could put green space there, or provide whatever the city was interested in doing with that space. The advantage to this would provide more of a traditional intersection design, more pedestrian friendly. The disadvantage would be that it would require acquisition of the 2 duplexes north of the alleyway. The second one that we looked at would try to minimize some of those impacts by extending it to the north, extending Sawyer Street to the north, but then tying into the alleyway to the boat landing and to the rest of Rainbow Drive. Like I said, this would reduce your right-of-way impacts possibly. You would still impact the bait shop in that corner and the bar, but it would reduce some of those other impacts. The disadvantage is that it does require vehicles to maneuver 2 intersections basically about 175 feet away from each other. So that can be a little bit more difficult, especially with your trucks with boats and things that might be accessing the boat landing. The last alternative kind of looks at skewing the intersection a little bit of Oshkosh Avenue and Sawyer Street. That would impact the bar and the bait shop, but just minimally impact those duplex properties, that they'd still have a front lawn area, but a reduced size, and tie it back into Rainbow Drive. The disadvantage to this one would just be the slight skew of the intersection, but with Oshkosh and Sawyer Avenue being signalized, this isn't as big of a deal. Generally at stop control conditions, you want to make sure that right angle is met, just for people's ability to look right or left as they're trying to cross the street. With the signal, they have a little bit more guidance, so that's not as important, but still can create a little bit of a safety disadvantage. It also makes it a little bit less desirable for turning movements vehicles, if this was selected as the design gets further along. I think make it work, but it would be a little bit more challenging. One thing else I would like to note with all these alternatives is your eastbound left turn lane. So this turn lane here, in order to fit that in with the current right-of-way constraints of having to be back on the existing right-of-way by the time you get to these properties, might be a little bit challenging. You'd be able to provide a little bit of a turn lane, but not a desirable one, but at least get those vehicles out of traffic. The city already owns these 3 properties here, so that makes it a little bit more feasible to obtain this type of design. So looking at performance measures of this alternative, with the combination of Rainbow Drive and Sawyer Street being one intersection, we still have acceptable level of service for all movements, and you would still be able to provide efficient relief of those traffic backups after the lift bridge. Some of the disadvantages would be the limited eastbound left turn storage, and some possibility with some of those left turn maneuvers. As far as safety goes, again, this would provide more of a standard intersection, provide for those pedestrian accommodations. The only disadvantage would be, some of the offset or skew that might occur based on what properties that were obtained to create this design. The big advantage for this alternative would be the access. You now provide direct access to and from Rainbow Park in all directions. You still provide those gaps in traffic for the unsignalized intersections along Oshkosh Avenue. And I should say too, the same as we talked about with the alternative 1, you would be able to still provide that bike lane along Sawyer Street and connect up and reduce to 1 lane southbound along Sawyer Street after the intersection. Overall, the feasibility of this basically comes down to the right-of-way that would be required, and the higher cost of kind of combining these 2 intersections. The advantage, though, is you'd provide that full access to the park and possibly provide more green space in that area. The last alternative that was looked at was the roundabout. From an operational standpoint, with everything going on in this intersection and the unique geometry that's there now, the roundabout alternative looked pretty appealing. Then you start talking about the constraints to the south and the lift bridge to the east, and it gets a little bit more difficult. So this was basically what we did was try to mimic the Keller Street roundabout as far as diameter and things, as standards have changed and desired diameters of roundabouts. A lot of times you'll see a bigger roundabout footprint. with Keller Street having this similar diameter, I think we'd be able to make this work at this location too. But again, as you can see, it kind of eats into the park a little bit to the south, and we're cutting it pretty close to connecting into the bridge to the south and to that monument structure that we want to make sure to avoid. So looking at performance measures here, it does have acceptable operations, and the big disadvantage to this, though, is the unstable traffic operations after a lift bridge is lifted. Roundabouts typically don't relieve traffic as efficiently as a signalized intersection for several reasons. I think the main thing too is with the center island or circle, generally the goal is to put some vegetation and things in there because you don't want people to see the other side of the roundabout. It causes them to maybe wait longer than they need to make their movements and things like that. But as a result, if the lift bridge is up, eastbound traffic can't really see what's going on ahead of them. So they might enter the intersection and you kind of basically can have a jam of the whole roundabout while the lift bridge is in operation. And so as a result, roundabouts just haven't been known to relieve of incidents as well as a traffic signal would. Again, if we did put a little bit smaller footprint of a roundabout in here, it can be a little bit more difficult for larger vehicles too. As far as safety goes, though, this would be typically roundabouts are safer than signalized intersections. You eliminate your left turns, which are your high severity crashes, and you reduce your conflict points. The disadvantage is that it's sometimes a little bit less friendly for pedestrians because there's no pedestrian signal to help them or guide them across the intersection. Also, as far as ADA goes, if you have a blind person using the facility, generally it's a little bit more difficult for them to hear what's going on with traffic around them. Advantages, it's similar to Alternative 2, where we now provide access to both the north and south side, but the disadvantage would be that we would not have that opportunity for gaps along Oshkosh Avenue for the side street traffic. As far as feasibility goes, I think that, again, the challenge is the lift bridge and really making that work. That kind of prohibits this alternative from being viable. That was everything with Sawyer Street. I don't know if anybody had any questions to start off.
I've been wondering about the traffic projection. You said you did it, but we haven't heard about it. So is it going to be 50% again as busy, or how does the traffic projection fit with these various alternatives?
Yep. So what I don't know the exact percentage that it increases offhand. I apologize, but basically all of these alternatives were modeled and analyzed and looked at to ensure that predicted future traffic volumes would operate at a level of service C or better. So just to kind of backtrack, and this level of service is basically a kind of a letter grade, similar to what you would see in school, A being the best, B, C, D, E, and F it goes down to. Overall, our goal is to, and the city's goal is to maintain a level of service C or better, and I believe that delay is about 25 seconds per vehicle.
Kelly,
so-
that was in the horizon year, correct?
Correct, yep,
Not in the current condition, but in
No.
the horizon year, 25 years out.
correct. So if we had anything less than
Better service than that up until the horizon.
It would slowly decline to that assuming the traffic patterns grow as estimated in the modeling, it would slowly decline to that level of C in the horizon year. That was our goal that we set up as we established the protocol, if you will, for the analysis. Is in that horizon year, 25 years out, we didn't want to drop below a level C.
What's Ninth Avenue and its roundabouts? What level is that now?
I don't know that we have an analysis as far as what level of service they provide at this
I
point.
know we did when you built it. I remember looking at it, but I don't remember what it was. Thought it was C, but
I don't remember what the
Okay.
DOT analysis was on that one. I'm
it's
sorry.
a way to compare now.
Right.
Well, if this is more a question for city staff, but how do the property acquisitions that you've already made help that intersection? It doesn't look like it really, except for one option,
So
doesn't really look like it's done a lot. Do you need to buy more, or is it?
it basically allows alternative 2 or 3 to work. It provides the opportunity to make that conductivity between the north and south side. Without those properties, you're kind of stuck at this alternative
So
1.
it really does help
Yep.
buy some.
It does help, but not all the way to be able to, complete the intersection.
We
Right.
have a straight shot no matter what.
Not without getting more of them, yes.
Right.
But it helps somewhat. Okay,
Yes.
thanks.
I got a question about that. There's a lot of daily discussion on Facebook about the Reps Tavern, if the Supleys bought it, if the city bought it, or.
I'm glad you asked. The Suplee sale did not happen. When we became aware of it, we've been looking at this long-term. We've presented an offer to the reps, which they've accepted. It's subject to council review, and we'll be presenting that to council within the coming week. So the right-of-way issue will effectively be addressed regardless of what option is selected by the council. But thank you for asking, yeah. And Jim, you wanted to maybe answer Kathy's question.
I just talked to the DOT about that roundabout the other day, and it's during peak hour, it can get all the way, it's down to a level service of E, but that's only during peak
Keller and
hour.
Ninth.
At Keller and Ninth, so
okay.
there are some issues there during peak hour because of the lane utilization, but we looked at some different modeling and there's not a lot we can do to improve it right now, just based on some of the geometric issues there. But most of the day, it's C or better, but there are issues there at peak hour. So I would assume, I don't think Oshkosh Avenue's quite as busy in this area as that 9th and Kohler roundabout, but there are challenges there during peak hour. And I think most people realize that they've been over there during peak hour.
But Kelly said that this is intended to be a C, so it'll be
Correct.
better than some of the peak problems we're having over there by Walgreens.
One quick question is, was boat traffic. We have no control over when we open and close the bridges. Did you analyze boat traffic the next 10, 15 years? And I think that's the heaviest used bridge because there's more marinas between Congress and Wisconsin.
So are you thinking that boat traffic would increase as time goes on?
As long as the economy is good, yes, it will increase.
We did not look at that specifically yet, but that is a good point to consider. With a signalized alternative, I'm not sure exactly how the intersection operates today, but you can connect some of the operations of the lift bridge with the signalized intersection and only show green movements to movements that are allowed while the lift bridge is up to relieve that traffic. So then once the lift bridge goes back down, you can focus on those movements that were stopped as a result of the bridge. That can help some of your operations. But other than that, as boat traffic, if it does increase, you definitely are going to see impacts to the intersection, I think, no matter what you do. So moving on to Oshkosh Avenue and Westfield intersection. I didn't provide an existing here, mainly because there will be a north approach to the intersection. So our first alternative was just to maintain that traffic signal, add the north approach, and then also add those left turn lanes that we discussed in the corridor alternatives. As far as operations go, this provides acceptable level of service for all movements and then provides your left turn lanes that would be desired on Oshkosh Avenue. Safety-wise, it provides a conventional pedestrian accommodations with a pedestrian signal to help people cross the intersection, especially if there is commercial development that might occur that pedestrians might be interested in I guess destined to go there. And then it provides that left turn separation from the through vehicles. As far as access goes, it provides your full access at the intersection still and creates those gaps in downstream traffic for your stop controlled intersections. As far as feasibility, it is a little lower cost than a roundabout alternative and would have less right-of-way impacts. And again, it provides those pedestrian signals. The second alternative looked at was a roundabout. Knowing that we'd have more potential for right-of-way to the north, you can see the roundabout was shifted in that direction. As you can see from the picture, this would definitely have a bigger impact as far as right-of-way is concerned. Looking at the operations for this, it does have acceptable level of service. It may be a little bit more difficult for those larger vehicles. The big advantage to a roundabout would be that it increases your safety because it reduces those conflict points I talked about earlier. And then the bigger disadvantage would be the gaps in traffic that the signal would create versus the roundabout. Feasibility-wise, I guess you could say an advantage would be corridor consistency to the west. There's roundabouts, continue them forward. But the disadvantages would be the higher cost and right-of-way impacts. So that was it for Westfield as far as different alternatives. Any questions regarding that? Yep.
Actually, I have one. This is for city staff. Didn't you? Because if you look at the roundabout on here, didn't you guys all but tell the residents and the people who live on the south side that you wouldn't need to acquire land on the south side? This looks like it's acquiring quite a bit of land on the south side. Yeah. Looking in where all the blue is, it's acquiring a lot of right away on the south side.
It looks like it's acquiring real estate from the Davis property where there would be space available, but as far as the residential properties, I believe it's actually relatively close. There may be a little bit in that southwest corridor. It's hard to tell with the trees overhanging.
I'm just picking the nits that I know are going to come up if this goes, if this were the one that was chosen.
And
you
again,
can see
these
it
aren't
jogs to the north before it
Right.
swings around, and there is right of way there.
I'm playing residents advocate here.
It's okay.
And these
We're not
are-
recommending this one anyways.
Okay, well, that's good to hear.
And I'll speak for the elderly people at Evergreen Manor, they don't like roundabouts.
Yeah, overall, all these alternatives are very conceptual at this point. They're trying to follow the design standards and things that just give you an idea of what something would look like. As far as exact right-of-way that would be needed and things, this isn't perfect by any means to that level.
Right.
I would suspect, John, that when we made that statement, we had seen a draft of this and weren't impressed with this option. So it was probably as much a prediction as more than an assurance.
Right. You knew it was coming down the pike.
Yeah, and you can see, I mean, the right-of-way that's required on the north side, and Mr. Hoopman is over here sweating bullets looking at that option as
Yeah.
well. And that's part of it. But the other one that I don't think Kelly played up as much, it was really compelling to me, is that, and it's something that Councilmember Pansky brought up, the less friendly multimodal accommodations. We all know that roundabouts are not the most pedestrian-friendly. And if we want to get people, we want to invite people into this area, and we put a big, roundabout right in the way, we're kind of sending a mixed message. So that really does offer some great alternatives when you take a look at the Sawyer Street, and, you know, Kelly mentioned several times the access to the Sawyer Street bike lanes, as well as all the access points. If you take a look at the TIF plan for TIF 35, one of the improvements that was mentioned were some trail improvements to cross Sawyer Creek to join the area immediately to the north of Oshkosh West High School with this neighborhood. And those are the types of things I think we need to think about long-term as we're looking at this. And obviously that is going to steer you towards more pedestrian and bike-friendly alternatives, at least in this case.
Okay, so lastly, the Oshkosh and Keller Street roundabout. In this location, our desire was to, or the city's directive was to basically maintain, if we can maintain this roundabout as is, we'll do that. If we have some issues, let's look at what improvements can be made. Here's the existing roundabout as it is today. Looking at the performance measures in the horizon year with development traffic, we do see some unacceptable level of service for that southbound approach. So basically, the area that would be coming from the commercial development in Oshkosh Corporation. With that, some possible queuing issues to the interchange. You know, we've kind of already alluded to all the safety and access kind of advantages and disadvantages of roundabouts, so I'll skip through that. But so leaving it as no cost, no right-of-way impacts. But we wanted to increase our level of service or make it more desirable operations. So what we looked at, it was basically just adding an additional lane on that southbound side of the roundabout, provide a right turn lane that could be used to access the interchange and west of the interchange, and then have a lane for your through left movements. Overall, as you can see, this wouldn't require a lot of right-of-way. You could fit this in pretty easily, hopefully, and provide a little bit better operations. So again, the advantages to this would be that acceptable vehicle operations that we would see. One of the things I'd like to note is as we get closer to the interchange, we are seeing the roundabouts have more traffic, you know, kind of start to reach its capacity. So there could be down the line some possible interaction issues with the I-41 roundabouts as these roundabouts reach capacity with the development and other things in the area.
Jim, probably a question for you. Lori's texting, wondering about the crash data that we have. Are there any particular intersections that stand out that need specific attention? Or are we just focusing on what could happen in the future?
Sure, yeah, that area doesn't really have a high crash rate right now. I know I had given Kelly the data and
Yep.
looked at it as well.
So, yep, you sent me some stuff. We also pulled some crash data through the Transportal website, which kind of is a second look at it too. For the most part, these intersections that we're talking about all have a crash rate that's less than 1. And we kind of use that as an indication of a possible crash issue if a intersection has a crash rate greater than 1. And for the most part, at least from the Keller Street roundabout to the east, there are rear ends, angle crashes and things, but nothing that's out of the ordinary.
Thank you.
Kelly, there looks to be a little bit of possibilities for right-of-way on the south side, on the southern part of this roundabout. Could that help alleviate some of the queuing issues on the west approach over the long term?
Possibly. I think some of those issues are more a result of the roundabouts at the interchange hitting capacity, and I think improvements to that area would help more than providing, I guess, changes to that south approach. Yeah.
Something that comes up frequently on disadvantage, of course, is the, does not create gaps in traffic downstream. And that's a very important problem for people to get in and out of traffic. And so something you gotta consider. Impatience today is something that exists. Have your higher volume traffic times, there's less and less gap.
Right.
So it comes up on almost every one of the excess situations. Something to consider anyway. Try to not eliminate gaps.
Right. And that's where the traffic signal alternatives can provide some of those gaps that
Yes.
may be needed.
I know now that you got the Murdoch roundabout, between Murdoch and New York, you had traffic lights which created gaps. That's a thing of the past. And so it's difficult.
I studied these diagrams. I admit I had trouble seeing what the difference is between the existing and the alternative one. And so I believe you've told us that from the north, and right now we're sitting, looking up from the old vantage point.
Yep.
And so the North Keller Extended is not used very much
So,
right now.
correct.
But it will be. So you're talking about having a right turn lane going south. And anything else special about the improvements here?
Nope, that would be the main improvement is basically running our analysis operations of that southbound movement deteriorate as development increases to the north, just because they only had that one lane. So providing a separate right turn lane to access the interchange and whatnot kind of relieves any of those operational issues from the development. So again, this roundabout with our projected volumes would be a level service C or better.
Okay.
Kelly, what about the access points along Oshkosh Avenue in terms of getting that traffic to move towards these intersections? Did you take a look at how access restrictions, obviously we have the residences on the south side, but on the north side as we're looking at new developments, what's the appropriate thing to do with respect to those businesses there?
Yeah, so for the most part, with Keller Street and Westfield being so close together, our recommendation would be to only allow access from those 2 points and maintain pretty good access control along there. That increases safety and increases operations. And with our projections, we assume that the only access to those properties would be these intersections, and these intersections still maintain a adequate level of service.
But the residences on the south side, you can't take their driveways away.
Correct. Yep.
Does everyone realize that the changes here will be the city expense? There's no DOT money, correct?
That would be my expectation. I'll be city funded.
Right.
You've got recommendations that you're coming up on, is that right?
Yep, so if there's anything else, we can jump basically to the recommendations. So working with city staff and going through these alternatives, our initial recommendations would be the 4-lane divided section from Keller to Eagle Street, if right-of-way was available to provide that more aesthetic look to the corridor, enhance safety, and provide that gateway feature. From Eagle to Fox, we'd keep the more traditional 4-lane undivided since right-of-way is minimal there.
Mr. Roloff, has Parks Department been notified of the potential 4-lane divided aspect? Because they would maintain that, correct?
They haven't been hit with that, but anytime they know that medians are being discussed, they're on alert. But yeah, that's one of the things that we have to take a look at as we look at these options. Yeah, because you're right, it's going to be more maintenance, and
Yeah.
Ray will be singing the blues a little bit.
Okay, thank you.
Is there any potential of doing a sunken intersection, sunken middle area, instead of having a raised area? Have it be sunk, for stormwater potential? I know you're not redoing those entire roads in that area, as you wouldn't have to, infrastructure being okay.
It would be unconventional to do it there. The biggest issue I can foresee right off the top is the sanitary sewers right down the middle of the road. So that would put the stormwater storage right on top of the sanitary sewer, which isn't real desirable.
So how would roots play into that aspect then? Tree roots, how do you?
We'd have to try to plant either smaller species of trees around that, or try to, if there is a stretch where because of the curvatures of the road and the sewers that they get off, we may have to be able to deviate, or if we do a full reconstruction, we could look at relocating the sanitary sewer, but.
Not ideal.
And you would want smaller bushes or trees in this area too, just in case somebody was to hit it with their vehicle. You wouldn't want to damage, impact. So,
I think that's the
you could
most
just-
desirable, considering it will become a major gateway into the city. That
Correct, yep.
very aesthetic.
You could just provide grass too and mow that, or, provide, you could do other pavement treatments and things like that. Obviously, that wouldn't be as aesthetically pleasing.
Not to get Mr. Mauer mad at me, but if you see what they've done in Chicago down Michigan Avenue, it's not trees, it's just massive plantings, seasonal plantings. You can do that. So there's not a root problem per se.
Right. There's lots of different alternatives you could look at for that median area. Yep.
So the only other place in the city that I can think of is over by Taft that has the center green.
Mhm.
Is there any other locations that could be comparable in the city that we have besides the one on Taft?
South Park?
Say, yeah, South Park Highway 44 as it comes off of Highway 41.
Yeah. That's probably a little closer to the width that we'd be looking at versus Sawyer Street, which is an exceptionally wide boulevard. I think the South Park from 41 to 20th would probably be more similar to width-wise that we'd be looking at here.
And it would only be like trees and beautification stuff in the middle. It wouldn't be like signs, street signs or anything like that.
For the most part, it would just be trees or bushes at your intersections. If you did provide a little bit more of a median, then you might have a traffic signal or a sign. But along the corridor, I wouldn't see any reasons why you would need any signs.
Yeah, the terrace would be more important for the signs than the.
Correct.
That's
Thank
something
you.
you talked about too. I mean, if, with the reconstruct, if you can get some terrace, it gives somewhere to put the signs versus, some of the areas where it's narrower, then we have to put the sign into the sidewalk, which isn't really desirable.
And then my understanding too is snow removal. Some of the snow is getting relocated other places. The terrace provides that opportunity to store some of that there too.
Thank you.
Any other questions regarding the corridor or any other inputs? As far as the intersection recommendations, at the Oshkosh Avenue and Sawyer Street intersection, our recommendation would, preferred intersection alternative would be either Alt A or C, depending on the availability of being able to do something like this. But extending Sawyer Street, Alt 2B, just going to the alleyway is not ideal with the boat traffic and things like that. So one of the other two alternatives would be preferred. And then at Westfield, a traffic signal with left turn lanes on Oshkosh Avenue. And then at Keller, that improvement to the southbound approach to add that right turn lane. Any thoughts or questions about that?
there a higher cost option, lesser cost option? Or is that left for the city council and the staff to?
You're saying at each of the intersections?
Yeah.
Well,
Intersections and the
corridor.
and the, Oshkosh Ave.
As we kind of discussed before, a lot of the alt ones tend to be your cheapest alternative, and they get a little bit more pricey as they go up. Since we included every alternative we included, other than obviously the existing, is something that would be a viable option and that would meet the operational goals and things like that. So I would say all these alternatives would work. So your alt ones would be your lowest cost, but there are some drawbacks to that also.
Kathy, I'm going to take your question a step farther with staff, because I don't know the answer. When you were putting together the TIF plans, what would you say those alternatives were leaning towards based on, because Kelly didn't put that together.
Right.
Kelly's just doing the analysis.
And, well, of course, when we were doing the TIF plan, we didn't have Kelly's analysis.
Right.
So the numbers off the top of my head, Sawyer imagined a full reconstruction, similar to what she's talking about there.
2C.
2C, yes. Westfield was a intersection with the signals, as she's showing right there. I think-
Including turn lanes as well, I believe.
Yes. In fact, I should ask Steve. I know we talked a little bit about the roundabout at Keller, and I wasn't sure if we included more right-of-way, because we talked about needing another lane there. With that estimate for Keller, how far did you go with that estimate to the south?
I did include some right-of-way acquisition along the property in the northwest quadrant, as well as doing some pavement modifications there. I did not account for right-of-way acquisition on the east side, assuming that under the development condition, that would be acquired as part of one of the conditions of development.
The one that we did not include is anything about the entire length of Oshkosh Ave.
Correct. The median along Oshkosh Avenue would be the biggest item that's not included in there, and then whether or not that would actually step us from simply tacking a lane on to a full reconstruction at that point in time in order to be able to accommodate all the drainage and everything that would go along with the medians.
So the width answer is it depends. The intersections sound like they're covered fairly well, but the width is, and again, it's a scope issue that the council will ultimately pick, and I think the plan commission's role is, what do you envision seeing there? Traffic, you want it to be functional, and council, all those, plus can we pay for it? We didn't say it was easy.
One of the things we talked about in Plan Commission too, or I talked about at least, was along the north side of Oshkosh Ave, having wider sidewalks or bump outs, not just your traditional 5 or 6 foot sidewalk, but something a little bit larger. Thinking both of just pedestrian traffic as they move about in that area, but also bike traffic. I mean, I know you're going along the river and the trail and everything, but if someone does want to come off of Oshkosh, off of the 41 trail and come directly to those businesses, would they have a ability to then go down down Oshkosh Ave towards Sawyer? But just making it more pedestrian friendly on that north side of Oshkosh Ave and with a larger sidewalk, I know it would need more acquisition. But if it's any time to do it, now's the time, especially if if what we're doing is trading land with the golf course property, I think this would be the time to do it. So.
How wide was the sidewalk on the north side of the corridor?
We show 5 feet right now. Yep.
So in theory, you could make it even 10 feet wide, and that approaches the trail width, if you really wanted to do something like that. So
Yep.
add 5 more feet to the right-of-way on the north side.
Yeah, as far as the sidewalk, I mean, we maintain standard sidewalk width, but if the city desired a wider sidewalk and was willing to, I guess, handle the right-of-way impacts that go along with that, that could be a feature that would be added.
Probably jumping ahead of myself, but if, with the corridor recommendation, if we have green space in the center, would it be, we could put electrical in there right away, couldn't we?
In the median.
In the median. So,
Are you talking streetlights in the median? Is that what you're?
The ability, either streetlights or, I had a meeting with the Convention and Visitors Bureau, and they were talking about doing something more in the holidays to bring more people in. I was thinking, you know, if that becomes a landscaping, either small bushes or flowers, could we then put something for the holidays in there that we would require electrical? You know, as a kind of a gateway to the Festival of Lights and other activities, so.
Sure, that's possible. I mean, it'd be, you know, obviously more maintenance, similar to what, you know, the Parks Department, obviously with the I suppose electrical departments would just mean more maintenance from, if it was, you know, the city doing that.
Scooter.
But it's certainly possible.
Maybe plan to do it, so it's not an afterthought.
Yeah, that's definitely something during the planning process, but it's desired, you know, that's something that could be considered.
One of the things you can always do, conduit's cheap. You just get the conduit in, even if you don't do it immediately. You get the conduit in, you're there. When you decide you want to do something, you don't have to dig things up.
All those extension cords.
Our goal was to be done by 7, Mr. Mayor.
If there are no
We
further-
certainly, we obviously want input because we're going to have to start making decisions in terms of what we want to do. I think the whole idea behind Kelly's presentation was to give the council and commissions a kind of a rough idea of what this was going to take. There's no perfect answer, as you can see. There's pros and cons. Right-of-way is clearly an issue. We have some of the folks who are interested in doing development out there. They're obviously very interested. So I know it's a tough decision for everybody. Appreciate the time. And as you get back to your respective commissions, anything that you can share with staff would be great.
We had one item on the agenda about the final report and the timeline.
Oh, yeah. So the final report is projected to be due on February 6th or 15th, I believe, whatever that Friday is.
16th is Friday, I believe.
16th. We're working on that now. We're hoping to get that draft report to the city late next week for review and finalize that. So
Did that include cost estimates for the alternative?
I do not believe so.
I
We
don't
weren't
recall that
planning
that was a
to,
part of
no.
the scope of work for this agreement, no.
Thinking that's what, one of the topics that we don't have an answer for, so we might want to figure something out so that the council knows what the financial impacts
Yeah.
are of any alternative.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we did not have that as a part of the original scope of work for this contract, but, you know, if that's a direction we want to go, it would certainly be a contract amendment to include.
Well, city staff can't handle
I'm
cost
wondering if
estimates?
we could, because we did put some rough cost estimates together with the caveats that we described earlier, and maybe James and I can talk about that, because it's really a matter of what's the extra width along Oshkosh Avenue gonna cost us. With that, I'll flip the question back to you, Councilmember Pansky, since you brought it up. Do you want us to present at least the profile of an
Yes.
extra
Yes.
large
Yes.
width? I think that's something that we didn't discuss that in our
Right.
alternatives, but
Yeah, and I think it really depends on, you know, some of these typical sections. We showed varying widths of terraces and, you know, talk about different sidewalk. And really just, a lot of it depends on what those actual widths the city decides to go with will really impact cost.
And I wanted to ask you, because it's a legitimate question. I will share with you a story that I had with former Chancellor Wells when he was talking about everything he wanted to get done along High Avenue, and he asked about big terraces and big wide bike lanes and sidewalks and everything. And I said, that sounds great, Chancellor. And I think Mr. Patek, Mr. Braby's predecessor, was having a stroke thinking of, I was like saying, yes, yes, yes. And I said, okay, Chancellor, I just have one question for you. Which building are you taking out along High Avenue to get all this done? And then it's like, it all comes down to right-of-way. And you know, we can dream as big as we want or as big as we can fit into. So I think we have to think about our skinny jeans a little bit on this one. So I share that with you as the clock tolls 7.
All right, it's 7 o'clock. I thank everyone for coming. I remind you to turn your cell phones back on.
The weather forecast at 7, snow's coming at 7.
We're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.